Sarah Jenkins rushed through the door of Rosie's Diner, a local favorite in Springfield, Missouri. Rain poured outside, matching her stormy mood after losing her job that morning. The diner buzzed with the usual lunchtime crowd, the smell of coffee and homemade pie filling the air. Sarah slid into the only available booth, not noticing the woman sitting quietly at the table beside her, nursing a cup of tea and reading from a small, leather-bound Bible. "Just coffee, Black," Sarah snapped at the waitress who approached with a friendly smile. The young server, Melissa, nodded sympathetically, used to handling customers having rough days. Sarah's phone rang, her landlord, again. She answered with a hushed voice, explaining that yes, she would have the rent somehow by Friday. Tears welled in her eyes as she hung up, the weight of her situation crushing down on her shoulders. The woman at the next table glanced over, her kind eyes meeting Sarah's for just a moment. Something about her seemed familiar, but Sarah was too consumed by her problems to place her. "Everything has a purpose," the woman said gently, offering a reassuring smile. "Even the hardest days." Sarah bristled at the unsolicited advice, her defenses immediately rising. "Right. Like you would know anything about hard days?" Sarah muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Some people have real problems, not just church lady problems that can be fixed with a prayer." The diner grew quieter, several patrons turning to look. Melissa, the waitress, froze mid-pour at a nearby table, her eyes widening in recognition of the woman Sarah had just insulted. "Do you know who that is?" whispered an elderly man seated at the counter, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "That's Joyce Meyer." The name registered immediately in Sarah's mind. The internationally known Bible teacher and best-selling author whose face she'd seen on television and book covers. Embarrassment flooded through her, but pride kept her from apologizing as Joyce simply nodded kindly and returned to her reading. Sarah gulped down her coffee, threw a few dollars on the table, and hurried out into the rain without making eye contact with anyone. The shame followed her home to her small apartment where bills were piled high on the kitchen counter. With no job prospects and rent due, Sarah collapsed onto her worn sofa and finally let the tears flow freely. Across town, Joyce Meyer sat in her ministry office, unable to forget the young woman's distressed face. "Tom," she said to her assistant, "there was a young woman at Rosie's Diner today. Dark hair, blue coat, probably early 30s. Can you find out who she is?" Tom raised an eyebrow but nodded. After decades of working with Joyce, he knew she often felt called to help strangers in need. By evening, Tom had discovered Sarah's name and situation through Melissa, the waitress who had served them both. "She just lost her job at the manufacturing plant that closed," Tom explained. "Single mom, one daughter in middle school, 3 months behind on rent." Joyce nodded thoughtfully, jotting notes on a pad as a plan began forming in her mind. As Sarah tucked her daughter Emma into bed that night, she tried to hide her worry. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Emma asked, her 11-year-old intuition picking up on the tension. Sarah forced a smile and kissed her forehead. "Of course we are, baby. Somehow, we always are." But as she turned off the light and closed the door, Sarah had no idea how she would keep that promise, or that the woman she had insulted was already setting events in motion that would change everything. The next morning dawned gray and cold. Sarah woke early, determined to hit every business in town with her resume. Emma had already left for school when a knock came at the apartment door. Sarah opened it to find Melissa, the waitress from Rosie's, standing there with an envelope. "This is for you," Melissa said, her expression unreadable. "She asked me to deliver it personally." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope after Melissa left. Inside was a check for 3 months' rent and a handwritten note. "Everyone has bad days. I'm praying yours get better. With love, Joyce Meyer. Sarah sank to the floor, the check and note clutched in her hand. How could someone she had treated so poorly respond with such kindness? The shame of her behavior washed over her anew. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. "Is this Sarah Jenkins?" asked a professional-sounding woman on the other end. "This is Bethany Williams from Joyce Meyer Ministries. We understand you have experience in administrative work and manufacturing oversight. We have an opening in our distribution center that we believe might match your skills. Would you be interested in interviewing this afternoon?" Sarah could barely speak through her shock. Yes, I would," she managed to reply, writing down the details with a shaking hand. After hanging up, she stared at the note again, wondering what kind of person responds to rudeness with opportunity. She spent the next hour preparing her best outfit and rehearsing answers to potential interview questions, all while trying to process this unexpected turn of events. The Joyce Meyer Ministries campus was larger than Sarah had imagined, with modern buildings and well-kept grounds. She was led to a conference room where 3 people waited, including a kind-faced HR director who immediately put her at ease. The interview went surprisingly well, with Sarah's manufacturing experience proving relevant to their book and media distribution needs. "We'd like to offer you the position," the HR director said at the end of the interview. "The salary is competitive, and we offer full benefits." She slid a paper across the table showing a figure that was 15% higher than what Sarah had been making at her previous job. "We believe in second chances here, Ms. Jenkins. We all need them sometimes." Sarah walked to her car in a daze, clutching the job offer. As she sat behind the wheel, tears of relief and gratitude streamed down her face. She called Emma's school and asked if she could come pick up her daughter early. This news couldn't wait. When Emma climbed into the car, Sarah shared everything. The encounter at the diner, her shameful behavior, Joyce's response, and now the job. "Mom, you always told me that how we treat people when we're having a bad day shows who we really are," Emma said thoughtfully. "Maybe how people treat us when we're unkind shows who they really are too." Sarah looked at her daughter in amazement. When had this child become so wise? "You're right, Em, and I think I need to make this right." That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, writing a thank you letter to Joyce Meyer. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush as she poured out her gratitude and remorse. She explained about losing her job, her fears for Emma's future, and how ashamed she was of her behavior. "Your kindness has changed everything," she wrote. "Not just our practical situation, but my heart. I don't know how to thank you enough." 2 weeks into her new job, Sarah was thriving. The work environment was supportive, her colleagues welcoming, and for the first time in years, she felt financially secure. She hadn't seen Joyce in person since that day at the diner, though she'd sent her letter through Bethany in HR. Each morning, Sarah arrived early to help organize the volunteer group that packed care packages for local families in need, something she'd started doing voluntarily after witnessing the ministry's commitment to community service. On a Wednesday afternoon, Sarah was called to a meeting room where she found Joyce Meyer waiting. Her heart pounded as she entered, memories of their first encounter still fresh in her mind. "Sarah," Joyce said warmly, standing to greet her. "I've heard wonderful things about your work here, and I wanted to thank you personally for your beautiful letter." "Mrs. Meyer, Sarah began, but emotion closed her throat. "I'm so sorry for how I spoke to you that day. You didn't deserve that." Joyce waved away the apology with a gentle hand. "We've all been where you were, Sarah. Maybe not the exact same circumstances, but that place where fear takes over and lashes out. What matters is what happens next." Joyce explained that she was planning a special community outreach event and wanted Sarah to help coordinate it. "Your background in logistics makes you perfect for this," she said, And Emma can join the youth volunteer team if she'd like." Sarah nodded eagerly, honored by the trust being placed in her after such a short time with the ministry. The community event was scheduled for the following month at a struggling neighborhood center in one of Springfield's poorest areas. Sarah threw herself into the planning, working evenings and weekends to ensure everything would run smoothly. Emma joined her often, helping to organize donations and prepare activities for the children who would attend. As word spread about the event, Sarah was surprised to see Melissa from Rosie's Diner volunteer to help. "I've been watching you," Melissa admitted when they took a break together. "How you've changed since that day. It's like you're a different person." Sarah smiled, realizing it was true. The bitterness that had been her constant companion for so long had been replaced by something lighter, more hopeful. The day of the event arrived with perfect spring weather. Hundreds of community members showed up, families needing assistance, volunteers offering help, and local businesses providing resources. Sarah coordinated everything from the distribution of food packages to the children's activities, moving through the crowd with confidence and compassion that surprised even herself. Midway through the day, Joyce took the microphone to address the gathered crowd. She spoke briefly about community and second chances, then called Sarah to join her. "This woman," Joyce said, her arm around Sarah's shoulders, "is the reason we're all here today. Not because she needed help, but because when she received it, she immediately looked for ways to pass it on to others." Sarah blinked back tears as Joyce continued. "Sometimes God uses our worst moments to lead us to our best purpose." Sarah thought our meeting at Rosie's Diner was the worst day of her life. But God had other plans. The crowd applauded, many nodding in understanding of their own journeys through hardship to hope. That evening, as volunteers cleaned up the last of the event, Emma found her mother sitting quietly on a bench, watching the sunset. "Mom," she said, settling beside her, "I heard someone say you're going to share your story at church next Sunday. Is that true?" Sarah nodded, still amazed that she'd agreed to Joyce's request. "I'm nervous, but if it helps someone else know that one bad day doesn't define you, that kindness can change everything, then it's worth it." Sunday morning arrived with Sarah and Emma dressed in their best clothes, sitting nervously in the front row of the church. The sanctuary was packed, with over 2,000 people filling the seats. Joyce's sermon that day focused on the power of kindness in a harsh world, and Sarah felt each word resonate deeply within her. "And now," Joyce said as she concluded her message, "I'd like to introduce you to someone whose story embodies everything we've been discussing today. Sarah Jenkins has experienced firsthand how a single act of kindness can transform not just one life, but an entire community." Sarah took a deep breath and walked to the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "3 months ago, I was sitting in Rosie's Diner, having the worst day of my life," Sarah began, her voice gaining strength as she continued. She shared everything, her rudeness to Joyce, the unexpected check, the job offer, and how these acts of kindness had inspired her to look beyond herself. "I was drowning in my own problems, unable to see past them. Joyce's kindness didn't just solve my practical needs, it showed me a different way to live." As Sarah spoke, she noticed Melissa from the diner sitting with several other waitstaff, all listening intently. There was Mr. Grayson, the elderly man who had identified Joyce that day, nodding along with her words, and scattered throughout the congregation were volunteers from the community event, many of whom had become friends. The realization that her story had touched so many lives nearly overwhelmed her. "The most powerful thing about kindness," Sarah continued, "is that it spreads." After receiving Joyce's kindness, I found myself looking for ways to extend it to others, and I've watched those people do the same. She gestured to the front row where Emma sat, beaming proudly. My daughter now leads a kindness club at her middle school, teaching other kids that how we treat people matters, especially when it's difficult. After the service, people lined up to speak with Sarah, many sharing their own stories of transformation through unexpected kindness. An older woman gripped her hands tightly. "I was ready to give up," she whispered. "But hearing how your life changed gives me hope that mine can too." A young man explained how he'd been inspired to forgive someone who had hurt him deeply after hearing her speak. Melissa approached with the other waitstaff from Rosie's. "We've started something at the diner," she explained excitedly. "A pay-it-forward board where customers can prepay for meals for those who can't afford them. It's already helped dozens of people in just 2 weeks." Sarah hugged her, amazed at how far the ripples had spread from that rainy day encounter. That evening, Joyce invited Sarah and Emma to her home for dinner. As they sat around the table with Joyce and her husband Dave, Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought them here. "I've been thinking about something," Joyce said as they enjoyed dessert. "Your story resonates with so many people. Would you consider sharing it beyond our community? Perhaps at some of our conferences?" Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean travel and speak to people?" The thought both terrified and excited her. Joyce nodded. "Your authenticity is powerful, Sarah. People connect with real stories of transformation. Not perfect people, but real ones who've struggled and found their way through kindness and faith." As Sarah drove home with Emma sleeping in the passenger seat, she reflected on the extraordinary chain of events, from insulting a stranger in a diner to potentially speaking before thousands, all because that stranger had responded with kindness instead of judgment. The night sky stretched above her, vast and full of possibilities she never would have imagined 3 months ago. "Mom?" Emma murmured sleepily as they pulled into their apartment complex. "Do you think we'll ever know how many people were helped because of what happened at the diner?" Sarah smiled, reaching over to brush her daughter's hair from her forehead. "I don't think we're meant to know, Em. I think we're just meant to keep the kindness moving forward." 1 year later, Sarah stood backstage at a women's conference in Dallas, Texas. Through the curtain, she could see thousands of women filling the arena, all there to hear messages of hope and transformation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, who was back home in Springfield with Sarah's mother. "Knock 'em dead, Mom! We're all watching the live stream." Joyce approached, giving Sarah's shoulders a reassuring squeeze. "Nervous?" she asked with a knowing smile. Sarah nodded, smoothing her new blazer, a far cry from the worn blue coat she'd worn that day at Rosie's. "Always, but it's a good kind of nervous now." In the past year, she had spoken at 12 events, sharing her story and the lessons she'd learned about the power of responding to judgment with kindness. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, "please welcome to the stage Sarah Jenkins." The crowd applauded as Sarah walked out, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She took her position at the center of the stage, waiting for the applause to die down before speaking. "A little over a year ago, I sat in a diner in Springfield, Missouri, having the worst day of my life," she began, the words now familiar but never losing their power. "I was angry, scared, and when a kind woman offered me some encouragement, I insulted her. That woman was Joyce Meyer." A murmur went through the crowd as Sarah continued, detailing how that moment of rudeness had been met with extraordinary kindness. As Sarah spoke, she noticed a woman in the third row wiping tears from her eyes, nodding vigorously at every point. There was something familiar about her, but Sarah couldn't place her until halfway through her talk. It was Karen, the HR director who had interviewed and hired her at Joyce Meyer Ministries. Sarah hadn't known she would be at the conference. "The most important lesson I've learned," Sarah continued, approaching the conclusion of her talk, is that kindness isn't just something we do. It's a choice we make about who we want to be in this world. When Joyce chose kindness in response to my rudeness, she wasn't just helping me. She was showing me how to live differently. After the standing ovation and the meet and greet session that followed, Karen approached Sarah backstage. "I never told you this," she said, embracing her warmly. "But the day Joyce asked us to interview you, I was skeptical. I thought it was just another charity case." She shook her head, smiling. "I've never been happier to be proven wrong. You've inspired so many of us, Sarah." That evening, in her hotel room, Sarah received a video call from Emma. "Mom, guess what happened at school today?" Emma's face was animated with excitement. "Remember that kindness club I started? The principal wants us to develop it into a full program for all the middle schools in the district. We're going to train student leaders and everything." Sarah beamed with pride. At 12 years old, Emma had already grasped what had taken Sarah decades to learn. That kindness had the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. "That's amazing, Em. Your club has already done so much good." The Kindness Club had organized food drives, created a buddy system for new students, and even developed a program to help elderly neighbors with yard work and errands. The next morning, Sarah met Joyce for breakfast before their flights home. "I received this yesterday," Joyce said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. "For the Community Center Renovation Project. From someone who was inspired by your story." The anonymous donation was the final amount needed to complete renovations on the community center, where they had held their first outreach event. "It never stops amazing me," Sarah said, shaking her head in wonder. "How far the ripples go." Joyce smiled, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "That's how kindness works. We never really know the full impact of what we do. That day at Rosie's, I just followed what I felt led to do. I had no idea where it would lead." As their breakfast concluded, Joyce reached across the table to take Sarah's hand. "You know, I've been doing this ministry work for decades, and people often ask me what my greatest accomplishment is. Lately, I've been thinking it might be that rainy day at Rosie's diner." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Joyce continued. "Not because of what I did, but because of what you've done with it." Their flights were called, and the two women embraced before heading to separate gates. As Sarah settled into her seat on the plane, she opened her journal to make notes for her next speaking engagement. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "From insult to impact, how one moment of kindness changed everything." The plane lifted off, carrying Sarah back to Springfield, back to Emma, to her job at the ministry, to Rosie's diner where it all began, and to a community that had been transformed by a chain reaction of kindness that started with one choice on one rainy day. As the city below grew smaller, Sarah smiled at how life had come full circle, and at how a moment that once seemed like her lowest point had become the foundation for her greatest purpose. As we close this story of Sarah and Joyce Meyer, we're reminded that our darkest moments can become the doorways to our greatest purpose. In a world that often responds to harshness with more harshness, choosing kindness is a radical act of courage. Perhaps you've been Sarah, overwhelmed, lashing out from a place of pain. Or maybe you've had the opportunity to be Joyce, facing someone's anger with compassion instead of judgment. The truth is, we've all been both at different times in our lives. The most powerful transformation happens not when our circumstances change, but when our hearts do. Sarah didn't just receive a job and financial stability. She received a new way of seeing the world and her place in it. One act of unexpected kindness created ripples that touched countless lives, reminding us that we never truly know the impact our choices will have. What small act of kindness might you offer today? What judgment might you withhold? What forgiveness might you extend? Remember Sarah's story when you face that choice, and know that sometimes the most meaningful changes begin in the most unlikely places, even a small town diner on a rainy afternoon. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Has someone's unexpected kindness ever changed your life? Or have you witnessed the ripple effects of your own kindness toward others? I'd love to hear your stories, and if you want more content that inspires and reminds us of the power we each have to change lives, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for spending this time with us today. Your presence and support mean more than you know.